Welcome to Voices in the Wilderness, conversations about church and leader health. Thank you so much for listening. We encourage you to keep the conversation going. Voices in the Wilderness is brought to you by Preparing for Amazement Ministries, where we empower and equip churches and leaders to create lasting and transformational health. Visit amazed15.org to learn more. We also welcome any comments or suggestions. Simply email us at podcast@amazed15.org. My name is Marcus Carlson, and today our guest is Jonathan Haseley. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hey, Marcus, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you here. And as a reminder, this is part 2 of a 2-part episode where we're hearing a little bit about your ministry context and getting an update on that, and then hearing a little bit about your doctoral project and what we can learn from that. So maybe if somebody just missed the last episode, maybe just give a quick kind of 2-minute context and the focus of your doctoral project.
Sure. Yeah, I am currently serving as the pastor of St. Paul's Lutheran Church of Blossom in Elma, New York. So we're situated right outside Buffalo, New York. And I've been here for almost 3 years. And we're in a season of revitalization, rebuilding, and moving forward after a fire. So we have an interesting story with that. And I decided to throw on top of that to work on a doctor of ministry to keep the plate full. And it's been really cool to dive into the area of research, which is really a connection between the religious landscape that's changing, bivocational ministry, and the shifting patterns that are going on with theological education, which is leading towards the project being a contextualized program for raising up bivocational leaders in the local church.
And when you talk about bivocational leaders, I mean, are you talking about, professionally trained leaders and pastors, or are you talking about lay leaders and pastors, or a little bit of both? I mean, obviously, you've talked about changing theological education. So clarify that for me and for our listeners.
Yeah, I think when we think of bivocational pastors, we can think of the full spectrum, because there's going to be pastors that are not having an MDiv, but they are looking for that toolbox and those competencies to be able to function in a local church setting, which could be a traditional church, it could be a church plant, it could be a micro church, any of those types of things. But there's also bivocational pastors that are going to have formal theological education, but maybe they're serving as an accountant or a doctor or a carpenter or a teacher. And so I think it's important that we look at the full spectrum of what that is and not box people in. One of the things that I've learned in my studies and research and just talking with people that are in the trenches of ministry is a lot of them are now considering themselves co-vocational, where they see that their vocations are not distinctly separated, but there's more of a holistic connection between them, where what they're doing in maybe a place that many people wouldn't consider ministry, they consider that just as much ministry as when they're doing the pastoral role. And so I think you're seeing an integration of that vocation, which I think overall is a really healthy thing.
Yeah, I always joke that I'm octo-vocational.
Yeah.
Many things on the plate and the buffet. What have you learned so far that you think could be helpful to congregations, their leaders, and others? I know you're in the middle of the process, but what have you learned so far that you think could be helpful?
Yeah, so what I did is I interviewed congregational leaders at my own congregation. I interviewed some theological educators, some demographers, and some bivocational pastors. And one of the things that came through as this thread throughout all of that, whether it was the congregational survey or interviews, was the whole idea of expectations.
Mm.
And really a two-sided thing where what are the expectations that the bivocational pastor would have of themselves? And then what are the expectations that the congregation has of the pastor? And those things can get gray or blurred, or things are assumed and things need to be spelled out, which is important.
Things assumed in churches and congregation members having different expectations. I mean, that's shocking to me, really, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing, because a lot of times there's a lot of people in churches that are thinking of a prior era model of, well, of course the pastor is always available and the pastor has X, Y, and Z because this is how it's always been. And like I mentioned before, we have this shifting landscape where the other model is increasingly not being tenable for a lot of
Mm.
these congregations for a variety of reasons. Financial, maybe it's just the lack of people available for pastoring, all these types of things. But the assumptions and the expectations are the same, even though that's not feasible for the condition that's really on the ground in the environment in which the ministry is taking place.
Yeah, for sure. And you kind of get to live this a little bit. So, how have you or will you take kind of what you've learned so far and apply it in your ministry?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, clear communication has been huge.
Mm.
So, whether that's been with other staff, whether that's been with key volunteers, with the church council, and even being able to get ahead of and talking to the congregation about that, uh, over communication has been like, I always say, like, if I'm sick of hearing it, that's probably when other people have heard it for the first time. But then also, instead of just kind of the from the front thing, having key conversations with individuals, whether there's a misunderstanding or whether there just needs to be clarification on something, I think that's also been huge as well.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, and I mean, I think how would so in churches you've served in small churches and large churches. How would you see that some of that advice being applied? Because certainly, obviously, communication is a really big deal, but there's other pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, in this setting, I'm the only full time person at the church. We have a part time musician, a part time secretary. In contrast to where I've served previously, where I had to lead teams with a full time youth leader, a full time children's director. Um, at that larger church, I had to have clear communication with the team that we were moving as one unit. Here, it's I don't have the people always around me at the church. They have other jobs, they have other commitments, they're working part time. So making sure we're staying on the same page has always been consistent, but the environment maybe looks a little bit different with that. And I would have to say that depending on how many moving parts you have going on, whether you're at a larger church that has many different types of programs or you have a smaller church that maybe has a fewer amount, I think clarity around what are the expectations of me and what are my expectations of leadership with that, I think are huge to make sure everybody's on the page with.
That makes sense. And I'm curious. Obviously, you said that theological education is changing, which it is, and certainly we've talked about more pastors being bi or co-vocational. What do you see as the pluses and minuses of that going into the future?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there is something to it where you can all too easily fall into a silo model of if you're a full-time pastor where you get kind of cocooned off from your ministry context and your ultimately your mission context. And so I think that's very real. I think with a bivocational or co-vocational model, if you have a job in the marketplace in business, where maybe you're a teacher or whatnot, you're already placed in a mission context, and so you can live out and model what you're encouraging the rest of your congregation to do. And I think you get a little street cred with the people saying, "I got to get up and go to work on Monday morning too, besides everything else that's going on." But with the flip side of that is without time management, clarity of expectations, it can become very overwhelming. There can be burnout, there can be stress on family life, all stress at work, stress with church. And so I think you have to be a good manager of time and expectations, like we talked about before, in order for this type of model to be successful.
Yeah, it makes sense. And obviously, there's lots of different ways to do it. I think
Hmm.
sometimes congregations feel like I mean, pastors only work on Sundays anyway, as we know, but
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, but I mean, I think congregations when they can't afford a pastor or they can't find a pastor, even larger churches, they're in searches for multiple years because of the shortage. They can feel like that's some sort of failure or some sort of sign that something's wrong with them. What would you say to churches like that?
I would say, we're not in Kansas anymore, and I don't think we have to assume that thinking creatively about a bivocational or co-vocational model is a sign of defeat. I think it's actually the green edge of the kingdom that's becoming more and more commonplace. And in all actuality, the full-time pastoral model is really a small blip on the screen of church history, not only in our country, but just worldwide throughout Christian history.
Yeah, I think that even that idea of the paid professional full-time pastor is is a blip in the current world today. This is still mostly a North American and slightly European thing. Certainly, someone who's spent a lot of time in Africa and Asia, uh, you know, it's not always that way. And how's your congregation taken this journey for you and being a part of this doctoral journey? How has that gone?
They have been really supportive. People have been asking, "How's the research going? Have you found out anything interesting?" Because they have a genuine interest. I mean, they've been very supportive of me becoming more educated, trying to understand the cultural moment that we're in, understanding the landscape. And so they were very receptive to participate in the congregational survey, asking questions on, like, I hope we did well in these types of things. And I was like, I just needed you to answer as honestly as you could to help with that. But they've been very supportive of it.
Yeah, and what's one thing, again, from so far, if like you could give one nugget to churches as they think about leadership into the future, what one nugget of wisdom would you give them from your learning and research and experience so far?
I think it would be understanding what are the things that we need to hold on to with a closed fist, those essentials, and then what are the things that we can put in an open hand and allow God to creatively use that for the situation that that church is in. Um,
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is kind of a refining process with a lot of churches where it can hurt or it can be uncomfortable, but I think God is bringing about refining so that He's putting His church in a position to really do some great things in the future.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think a lot of times we've got to hold our theology semi tightly and hold everything else loosely, for
Hmm.
sure. So, Jonathan, I really appreciate making time to do this. And I knew it was going to be too much for one episode. And so we wanted to do a couple episodes and certainly kind of wish you luck as you continue to dig in and, keep us posted on what you're learning and what we can learn as we kind of try to help serve churches together.
Yeah, absolutely. And my end goal of all of this is to have a deliverable, a resource that will help the greater church, capital C, as we move more and more into this present future.
I love it. I love it. Again, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marcus.
Again, thank you for listening. We encourage you to keep the conversation going. Voices in the Wilderness is brought to you by Preparing for Amazement Ministries, where we empower and equip churches and leaders to create lasting and transformational health. Visit amazed15.org to learn more. We also welcome any comments or suggestions. Simply email us at podcast@amazed15.org.